One.
Greeting, folks. This is the conference Bringing the Light of Christ to Our Culture. We have been kicked out of 3 venues, but by the grace of God and with the hard work and generosity of some friends, our conferences took place here at the Classic Buffet. I would like to introduce our first guest speaker. He's going to be talking about religious liberty and louder for Lord have mercy. Okay, do you want me to restart again?
No, it's fine. Just speak a little bit louder.
I'm going to introduce Father Stefaniuk, and he's going to be talking about religious liberty and morality from a Ukrainian Catholic perspective. Father Stefaniuk.
Just as a beginning, I kind of had some involvement with one of the venues before this one, and kind of have to apologize that really it didn't quite turn out, and kind of actually unrelated reasons compared to what some of the other ones were. So that one particular venue at the church was actually my fault. I actually take the blame for that part. I have a title for my talk, and I call it Catholicism and Separation of Church and State and what it means to be a human being. So that's my topic around which will kind of focus my thoughts. So for example, with Catholicism, there's two phrases that I wanted to speak on. One is the idea that the body and it alone reveals what's invisible. So we need to live in our bodies in order to experience the spiritual, experience Christ. So for example, when you have water and you use that for baptism, that's an example of what's meant by that phrase of through the material world we experience the divine. And then there's a second phrase that I'd like to use, which is that each act of sexuality should be open to new life. This kind of principle is expressed in a few different ways. One way it's expressed is that the unitive and procreative aspect of sexuality, but just this general principle that as human beings to express our sexuality in such a way that we're open to new human life. And then one of the things that it accomplishes is because we become a witness that we're not just living in a material world. We're not just animals. That kind of witness. That in fact we are body and soul, and we have this life. And so when we express our sexuality in that way, then we're also participating with God, really, in this world, and we're making that witness of saying that we're not just as animals are in this world. And then the third aspect in terms of what it means to be a human being, I've been reading some of the works by a philosopher, Jacques Maritain, and he's the one that had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in the 1940s. So you can kind of see where I'm going with bringing him in, because he found a way in which people could work together who had so many reasons for being separate, whether it was religion or other things, but he found a way. And so one of the things that he says is that the human nature that we share together is a rational nature, and we need to be able to actually build up on that. So one of the things, for example, that he says is that we're going to confront the act of our own existing by an intelligence that's determined never to disown itself. So, applied to what we have here, say for example, we're defending prenatal life. One of the things you always hear is that you have to check your intelligence at the door and embrace the ideology. The same thing with some of these other, say in terms of genders, apart from male and female. Why is it that we have to basically really go against our own human intelligence that way in order to participate in any of these debates? So, for example, the Society of Gynecologists and Obstetricians in Canada, you can imagine what it takes to become a doctor. All of the intelligence it needs, and you need learning all of these things that people discovered, and then they say, well, to the young pregnant mother, well, you're the one that decides whether the product of conception is a human being or not. So that's what Maritain has in mind for us as a starting point, is that let us live our human lives as human beings, and not to disown or denigrate our own intelligence when we're speaking about these matters. Because if we approach them as human beings, we're going to discover all sorts of things. For example, one secular, very much a secular doctor, Dr. Miriam Grossman, that's the approach that she takes. That there's all of this really good prenatal evidence about when a person becomes male, when you become female. It's something that you can learn actually from science. So rather than checking our intelligence at the door and then embracing the ideology, actually let's start with what we can use as our intelligence. She also speaks in there, in general terms, about one of the things that she says in her book, You're Teaching My Child What. Her idea is very secular, is to wait as long as you can, and then when you do become sexually active, make sure that it's with somebody who's also waited. And so that's kind of her advice. And then she has a part of that book it's almost, that particular part is worth reading the book. She has this real compassion and she really feels sorry for these 12 and 13-year-old boys, especially, that are really being taken in by this sexuality education and really confused to such a point that they're experimenting with their identity. And that's one of the points as well that I'd like to come back to. And another thing that Jacques Maritain says is that we should live our lives and not be bystanders in our own life. He says, and what he means by that is not to express our human freedom in such a way that we go off in all sorts of directions that we really see are harmful. He contrasts human beings with nature. Nature has boundaries. Nature has instinct, and human beings, we have freedom. That's the way we're created. The way we're created, we have this freedom, and of course, we would add to it because we're made in the image and likeness of God. But we need to live and act like human beings. So in that way, to express our freedom in such a way that it will be life-giving, rather than in a way that it's so boundless and so much license that it's going to, instead of our personality is meant to be this wellspring of life-giving wellspring, and if we express our freedom in a certain way, all it's going to be is just this real pit that we can't come out of from ourselves. There's real depth of despair. So, for example, even in terms of Christianity, the value that the Ten Commandments is giving us boundaries that by nature we wouldn't have. And so, with that, taking Maritain's advice and saying, okay, so living our life rather than just being bystanders, I'd like to approach this topic by letting you know a bit about myself. So, for example, in 1980 was my first year in seminary, and this was in Toronto. And the older seminaries, they discovered a documentary about homosexual life in Toronto, where they like to go. And it was really kind of, I guess in some ways, a pioneering, for cutting edge in some ways. And then what struck me in that documentary is a father. He was, his son was from Western Canada and went to Toronto. And what struck me was what the father said. And he was so bewildered when his son is going to become, enter the homosexual lifestyle. And he says to him, don't you ever want to have children? So that's his contribution to the documentary. And so here he knows from experience what it's meant to become a mature man with his wife, and that whole way also becoming a father. And so here he's so bewildered that his son is rejecting that, and he knows the great value of it. I hadn't thought of that documentary for a lot of years until one of Bill's flyers, and that also makes that point. So that's one of my first points I'd like to make tonight is to really not to forget that role of bringing children into the world. So even back to my title where I say about participating with God in the generation of new human life by expressing our sexuality in such a way that we're open to new life. So here's the quote from one of the flyers that made me think of this documentary. Dennis Jerrigan, one of the individuals mentioned in the Watcut literature, has this to say about his conversion. God does renew and transform, he said in his testimony. God does restore. Look at my life. Think of what I would have been robbed from if I had not followed the Lord. I would not have my wife and children. I would not have anything, really. So that particular point about our role in expressing our sexuality is bringing in So, and then the next point is also as a Ukrainian, so here again, kind of bringing in my life into this. One of our church leaders is speaking to Ukrainian in Canada, and he knows that we're 5th generation, 6th generation, or 4th and 5th generation, and he says, you know, you're never going to be happy with your identity as a Canadian until you rediscover your Ukrainian roots. And then he gave his explanation, because in that context of assimilation and losing language and culture and religion, so he said, you know, you're gonna really be at peace with yourself and your identity if you really learn your Ukrainian roots. So paraphrasing him, that's Cardinal paraphrasing him here, that we won't be at peace with ourselves and our own identity until we really come to grips with, as we word like the male, to come to terms with what it means to be, learn what it means to be a man. If you're a female, learn what it means to be a female. That particular way in terms of our identity, you know, that particular point. And then, of course, we really avoid all of those dangers of that experimentation. Because could you imagine, in all other areas of experiments, there's ethics guidelines, what you can do and what you can't do. And then suddenly, all of those rules are thrown out when it comes to saying, yeah, you need an experience with your sexuality in whatever way you want. Because that's the way of using human freedom. Another title that I could have for this talk is the use and abuse of human freedom. And so that's an example of just that whole encouragement to kind of discover that whole spectrum of different sexual identities. That's an example of a bad use of our human freedom, and of course the dangers that go with it. And then being Ukrainian, you've probably seen maybe icons, or you kind of know about the Orthodox icons, and so that's the next point I'd like to mention. You probably also heard the word iconoclasm, where these are destroyed. And this isn't my idea. I forget where I first heard it, that when we take this Christian idea of being made in the image and likeness of God, so that's kind of like an icon. And then now what's happening is this image in terms of marginalizing Christianity, really destroying that icon. So it's kind of like a whole, we're experiencing this whole iconoclasm now even in Saskatchewan. And so I have a quote from kind of the classic understanding of iconoclasm, see if it fits if your understanding of what we're experiencing here. So in a review of a book called Politics and Iconoclasm, it is always the prelude to political configurations and the emergence of a new state or new state actors. Beginning with the attack on Geneva's cathedral in 1535, it was then and remains today among historians difficult to know whether iconoclasm was primarily religious or political. So in other words, applied to even what we're facing here, what are the motives for marginalizing Christianity from this debate about sexuality? Is it politics, like you're saying about rights, or is it in fact ushering in also kind of a new religious understanding? It's kind of what I call the ABCs of anything but Christianity that comes with it. And so continuing kind of that whole idea of iconoclasm, there's this one mission statement that they have from Weber where they say that the evolution of society, that's actually a real kind of Marxist idea that your kind of human nature from earlier on is evolving, and what it means for us as Christians, for example, is that Christianity represents something from an earlier time. They won't even say it's an earlier civilization. They actually, so what's the opposite of civilization? Barbarism, right? And so you kind of need the ushering in of the homosexual man in order to bring civilization. So you can see how dangerous these ideas are, that understanding that Christianity doesn't represent civilization. And another danger of it is that when we say as Christians that God, who is Spirit, became a human being at his conception in his mother's womb. So now they're saying that idea of evolution of society, that the human nature that he takes on at Christmas time is actually, well, we've evolved since then. So in other words, Christ is irrelevant to the debate about homosexuality in the modern world because he's from an earlier time. So that's how they can marginalize him. Now as Christians, what we have Christianity says this about marriage, that marriage is Christianity's gift to civilization. And then as a subset within that gift, the highest form of civilization is a mother with child. So if you could kind of see that even as men, everything about us is wanting to build up and facilitate so that we can get to that point where we'll have a family. And so speaking again about icons, the greatest, so what we want to say is that the greatest form of civilization is a young mother pregnant and with a child. That's the greatest form of civilization as opposed to what you're saying. So in other words, we should be able to say some of these things without some of you being threatened with stereotypes. Because it's my conviction that if these police officers really knew what was at stake, they're not in the role of these new religious police. They think that we're secular terms. If they realize that in fact they're kind of the frontline police officers of this new kind of non-Christian kind of religion that's coming in, they would never agree to arrest you guys because that's not what they signed up for. And by way of wrapping things up, the last statement I'd like to make, and then we have a quote from our Catechism in Ukrainian Catholic Church that kind of sums up everything I've been saying. It seems to me that the statement that the body language of homosexual activity is saying this, that a man could be just as good of a woman as a woman. And so for us to say, men, we could never, ever be anywhere close to as good as a woman as a woman, because that's given who they are. So in other words, what we're doing, we're actually men doing their job for defending women, defending the honor of women by being engaged in these type of discussions. And so by way of bringing all of this together, I'd like to have this quote for you from our Catechism of the Ukrainian Catholic Church, which is similar to the other catechism of the Catholic Church. All forms of self-absorbed aggression against another human being, submitting another person to the demands of one's crass sexual pleasure, are offenses against God's gift of love. They are a corruption of the meaning of human sexuality and result in both the breaking of the sixth and the ninth commandments, so against adultery and also against coveting neighbor's wife, and profound injury to one another. A person is reduced to undignified object by all sexual activity outside of the sacrament marriage. And this is why adultery is a serious sin, along with the destruction of the fertility of the marital act through abortion and contraceptive technologies, and then also with homosexual acts as well. So that's the great dignity with which the Church wants to understand who we are as individuals, and then in that context to be warned against some of this use and abuse of our human freedom.
Thank you, Father Jeffrey. God bless you. Hey, the next guest that's going to speak is Peter LaBarbera. I'm sure many of you have heard of him. He was almost kept out of Canada in April when he came to join me at the banquet for the Saskatchewan Pro-Life. We were arrested for sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ and defending God's definition of sexuality and respect for human life at the University of Regina. Peter and I will be going to court in 2 days, and we're hoping to be acquitted. Certainly, we believe that our activities on the university campus were respectful and legal, and we believe as Christians that we have a role to play in the public square. So now I'll let Peter have a say and speak.
Thank you very much, Bill. And it's great to work with Bill Watcott, although I must say, even though I get in plenty of trouble myself on my own, getting to know Bill and working with him is considerably added to the trouble that I get in. And yesterday, Bill picked me up. Yesterday morning, picked me up at this morning, actually, right? Bill picked me up at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I had arrived from a flight into Calgary earlier, and I would have been shocked at taking 2.5 hours to get through customs, except that happened the first time that I went to do with Bill Watcott, and so it was like a deja vu all over again, as the customs agents literally went through my phone, my laptop, all my books and papers, and it's just sort of surreal to think that Canada was once a free nation and a great nation is now reduced to searching essentially Judeo-Christian literature for evidence of hatred, so-called, and it's of course redefined hatred. I got one of the border guards, by the way, was homosexual, and I had some interesting discussions with him, and I think I succeeded in assuring him that it's possible to have civil disagreement over something as like homosexuality, even if it's one of the main issues in his life, that we could disagree without hating one another. And but during that process, yesterday at the customs, they did seize, confiscate a video called Sodom, which is a Russian documentary, which I haven't seen. Bill has. Ironically, it's available on YouTube, but they took it as evidence, potential evidence of something that would violate Canada's hate propaganda law, which is effectively a hate speech law, barring speech based on sexual orientation that could, quote, incite hatred, unquote. But we do not have one of these laws in the United States, and that's one of the key differences, I think, between the United States and Canada, is that the First Amendment is sort of revered, even among the left, well, not among the hard left, but pretty much throughout all sectors of society, there is still a strong appreciation for our First Amendment, and so hate laws, hate speech laws, the closest we get to that in the United States are the campuses. But even there, they're being eroded by court decisions. Campuses are very dominated by the left, and they have tried to enact hate speech codes, but those are being challenged through the courts. Whereas my sort of outsider's impression of Canada is that these hate speech laws, as Bill knows, have emboldened the left, and it's just shocking now to see the left basically championing people being arrested or censored merely because they oppose the sin of homosexuality. So we have our court date, and that was for a peaceful protest. It should be noted that when Bill had a few signs. He had a picture of an unborn baby, and he had a sign. I think the sign said "Sodom is sin." I was sort of along for the ride, and this is in April of 2014. And when Bill was arrested, and then when I was arrested, I think it was the provost for the University of Regina, Saskatchewan, justified the actions against Bill Watcott. A peaceful protest on the basis that the students need to be protected from this extreme material. So this sort of progressive so-called condescension. Poor students can't think for themselves when they're in college. Of course, college should be a place where ideas can be freely debated. And so that was interesting, and I have great respect for Bill. I know he gets jumped on by a lot of people, including people who should have no business criticizing Bill Watcott. I saw it firsthand at my last trip here. But Bill Watcott, seems to me, has more guts than anybody in Canada of challenging this zeitgeist, this left-wing mentality that only one viewpoint on homosexual behavior is allowed. And I commend him for that. Even as some of his tactics are unique to say the least. But I think if Bill were to come to the United States, he would have a huge following, because I think there's a hankering, there's a sentiment among a lot of people, I sense. They want to do something, they don't know what to do. What is the left, and especially the pro-homosexual left, telling us right now? The mantra is, you're on the wrong side of history, our victory is inevitable, why don't you just quit? And I think people of faith and moral-minded people, all they need to do is think back to the days of abortion. Now, it's well known these days that young people are more pro-life, according to surveys, yet more pro-homosexual at the same time. There's been a massive education movement, massive education accomplished on the pro-life movement, which has led to the momentum really being in the pro-life, on the pro-life side. Young people are energetic. There's lots of activity among young adults and teenagers in support of life. Excuse me. On the homosexual side, however, there seems to be a dearth of young people engaged. But to the homosexual who says their victory is inevitable, all you have to do is think back 10, 15 years on the abortion issue. There was a time in the United States, at least, I believe it was in the mid-90s, when the pro-choice side was cocky, and they thought they were on the winning side of history. And they were telling, and even earlier, the radical feminists and the pro-abortion side was thinking that they had this won. What happened? There was a massive educational campaign, and now the pro-life side has the upper hand, and the radical feminists are worried that they're losing. And so there's no such thing as looking into the future in politics. We don't know what the future holds. But what I think we do know is, on the homosexual issue, we have to return to principle. In the United States, I think for many people in the United States, what they're afraid of in the politically correct atmosphere fomented by the media and educational establishment and pop culture, nobody wants to be perceived as, quote, anti-gay. And so the marriage movement, the pro-traditional marriage movement, noble as it is, was in some quarters held up as sort of the panacea for the movement. As the thinking went, the pro-family movement really wouldn't have to talk about homosexuality. They wouldn't have to talk against homosexual behavior. All they would have to do is talk positively about marriage. And even though talking positively about marriage is a wonderful idea and it's a good thing, we cannot argue this issue avoiding the central issue, which is homosexual behavior. Which is why, even though Bill Watcott gets criticized and he puts out graphic flyers, what those flyers do is they remind people of the, I believe, innate revulsion that many people have towards disordered and unnatural behavior. Factoring out homosexual behavior in the battle over homosexuality would be, to me, like factoring out the humanity of the unborn in the struggle for life. It's essentially a unprincipled position, and I understand why it was idealized, but I don't believe it was effective. And I believe we're going to have to get back to homosexual behavior in the struggle, and also talk about former homosexuals who are a living testimony to the possibility of change, that the issue is about behavior and not identity. To me, homosexuality is about what you do, not who you are. And people can change their behavior. And the most heartwarming aspect of the work that I do, and I've been doing this for 20 years, are the former homosexuals. The vast majority of whom have come out of homosexuality through the miraculous grace of Jesus Christ. I can tell you the story of Charlene Cothran. It's a wonderful story. She was a black lesbian. She was the toast of the town for the LGBT community. She had a magazine called Venus, which had attracted corporate sponsors. She was a very famous figure within the homosexual subculture. Her mother was a Christian. Her mother told her once when she was living in the lesbian lifestyle, "Charlene, I'm afraid that I won't see you in heaven." And Charlene knew what that meant, that if she continued living the lesbian lifestyle, she could be eternally separated from God. And so people were praying for Charlene Cothran. I'll cut the story short. One day she was one of the speakers, or one of the stars, as it were, at a black gay pride event in Chicago. And as she looked out at this black gay pride event, all of a sudden this immense, tremendous sense of shame came over her. Now, you could try to explain that, but to me that's a miracle of God. That's the Holy Spirit
Oh,
at work.
yes, absolutely.
And soon she was
Praise the
walking
Lord.
away through prayer. She walked away from lesbianism, and now she counsels other women from all backgrounds out of that sinful lifestyle. And so these are the stories that need to be told, and these are the stories which I believe will motivate young people to see what's at stake in this issue. The degree to which Americans and people, especially young people, are brainwashed on this issue it almost can't be overstated. Gallup did a poll in 2011 which found that the average American believed that the median American believed that the average, well, let's put it this way. The average American believed that 25% of the population was quote-unquote gay. 25%. Young people, even higher. I think it was over 30% for people younger than the average. So the actual numbers, as just reported by the CDC, the federal CDC in the United States, 1.6 for homosexuals, gays and lesbians, 0.7, I believe, for bisexuals. So if you factor in the transgenders, we're talking probably 2.4, 2.5% of the population LGBT. That 1.6 figure, by the way, was confirmed by a study in the UK previous to that. So even the 10% myth, which we dealt with for years, that was vastly overstating it. But young people now, because they've been so overexposed, intentionally of course, to the norming of homosexuality, have this ridiculous notion of the numbers in society. And so we have a lot of work to do on the issue, but I do believe that we have to get back to the core of the issue. Compromise doesn't work. Civil unions was held up by some as maybe that's a compromise. That's ridiculous because civil unions invariably leads